Hi everybody. So today's lesson is about the Oxford English Dictionary, and it's one of those things that's just an absolutely useful object to have. And in fact, I have one. Whoops, wrong hand. You can see it right there behind me. Whoa! Hard to do things backwards in the screen. Anyway, so I'm going to go get that down and show it to you so you have a sense of what I'm talking about. So if you buy a nice version of the Oxford English Dictionary, or if you did buy one, because I'm not sure that this one is in print anymore, it came with this little drawer at the top that contains a magnifying glass. Now my magnifying glass is currently in my lab where I use it to look at different kinds of things, but in any case, yeah, this is the case that the OED comes in. And so you can see here that this is the OED compact edition, right? So it's the edition that's the small one. I'm gonna take one of the volumes out of the case for you so that you can get a sense of why this book might need a magnifying glass. Okay, so if you get an Oxford English Dictionary compact edition, it comes 4 pages to each page. So can you see that it's printed 8 pages on each opening? And that means that the text is incredibly tiny, especially not only just the definitions, but then all of the paratextual material in the definitions. Okay, and so I'm going to explain to you why this is such an important resource, why it's something worth explaining to you in this class, and why you might want to make use of it in not only this class, but in all of your other classes as well, because this thing is an absolute airtight source for any kind of not only etymological or definitional work, but also when you need to know definitively what the part of speech is, how something works in its actual usage. Okay, again, in the days before the internet, if you wanted to go and look at the entire Oxford English Dictionary, you would have gone to the reference section of the library, and in fact you can still find the OED at the reference section of our library in Norland, and you go and you would take one of the now 14 or 18 volumes off the shelf. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit more about why there are so many volumes. And nowadays, of course, as I said, it's online, and I will take you through the online version. All right, so here we go. Okay, this is the home page of the Oxford English Dictionary. And you'll notice here that it says Access University of Colorado at Boulder. The university pays a couple of $100 a month to subscribe to the Oxford English Dictionary. And so you need to have access either to campus or through campus. So you can get there by going to the library homepage. Another possibility is that you can simply download the VPN from the OIT website, and then if you use the VPN, A, it's better for privacy, but B, it means that you have full access to campus resources as if you are on a campus server. The Oxford English Dictionary is a dictionary that was proposed in 1857. It took the proposers at Oxford 27 years even to get the first little bit of the dictionary out, right? It turned out that to make a dictionary that has a full record of the English language is quite difficult and challenging because of, as we're learning, language changes significantly over time. So the dictionary was finished in 1928, right? So 1857, it was begun. The first bits of it came out in 1884. and it was finished in 1928. But 4 years later, it was realized, of course, because English changes to the extent that it changes, that there needed to be more words. More words were coming into the language and more usages were being discovered, and therefore the dictionary makers, now again, keep in mind here, we're talking about 1928, so this is a 10-volume piece of mechanical production. Somebody has to actually physically make this book, right? So it's a giant, heavy, printed 10-volume book. Instead of revising the thing in 4 years, right? Because we're talking about the difference between 1928 when it was finished and the realization in the early 1930s that it wasn't enough, that it wasn't sufficient, that it was already out of date. Therefore, the way to handle this was to add these supplementary volumes that went at the end. Now, just a sense of how the dictionary was made and the reason it took so long. What you're seeing here in this is a history of the OED that I happen to have in my office. It's a terrific book, as you can see from my love-struck response to it. You know, these pages here are demonstrations of the very beginning way that the Oxford English Dictionary was put together. And what happened was the chief lexicographer, that's a person who writes dictionaries, researches words, his name was Murray, and he had to write a sort of invitation that asked anybody in the English-speaking world to send to Oxford University Press examples of words. The idea of the card is really significant because it shows you the kind of written origins, right? So you would take these cards and put them into effectively a manual computer, right? A giant machine he called a scriptorium. And effectively that was a bunch of boxes, a collection of where we would use perhaps a spreadsheet or some other list-keeping software. These were handwritten bundles that explained the history of words. So this vast network of volunteers actually made this possible. I just think it's so cool to think that we went from those written cards to a 10-volume book to a book that had those supplements. And then after the supplements, now that the thing is fully integrated and online, the OED has only been online since the year 2000. When they add new words, the new words appear already integrated into the dictionary. So you can see some of their recently published words are down here: delightedly, clocker, stink eye, and faulted. So let's just look at delightedly, see what it says. All right, delightedly. It gives you its pronunciation, and you can play that.
Delightedly. Delightedly.
It gives you its adjectival form. It gives you the suffix and the etymology. Look down, it says it's rare after the 16th century. No, this is the definition. In a delightful manner or delightful degree, delightfully, right? So it's the same word, basically. It's kind of made up word. But also notice here that it says, oh, it was used in the 1400s. And so this is what all those little cards were for, right? Each of those cards had a usage of the word, any old word, right? That gave a little example. This one is when philosophy had sungen softly and delightedly. These little descriptions give a year, right? Circa 1440. This one we know it's a 1530 because these two were probably in manuscripts, but this one is a datable piece of writing. Then it looks like the word goes away and then comes back on Twitter in January of 2020. The thing that's nice about the OED is that it gives you a really full accounting of the word and how the word was used historically. So As I keep saying, English is uncooperative, so let's take a look at some words that are more high volume, words we use all the time. Let's try the word best, because you know how to use the word best, right? You understand the syntax of the word best perfectly well. Let's take a look at what the dictionary says and how it might be useful to you in a class. When you're very carefully looking at a passage, the period in which a, say, poem in this class, but also any piece of writing in any class, there are shades of meaning in the words that you use. And the OED is an invaluable source for dealing with those shades of meaning and how usage changes over time. We have 7 results. Best as a noun, but best is also an adjective or an adverb, and best can also operate as a verb, a transitive verb, and then here are some uses of the word in a phrase. Let's take a look at what best is as a noun. It's giving me a whole story of how this word has been used, and so we always have these examples. All right, this is noun 2, which is the name Fran's best. This is noun 1, best as an adjective and best as an adverb. Okay, again, here's the pronunciation with a pronunciation guide. Here's its Old English form, so we know that it's a pretty old word. Its etymology comes from Old Frisian and Middle Dutch and Old Saxon. If I want to see more about the etymology, I can see its cognates in a whole bunch of different languages. Here is the adjective form. It means the superlative of good. If you don't know what superlative is, you can look that up in the OED as well. There's the letter A here to indicate that there are more shades of definition in that. In metallurgy, for example, and then here are the examples. And again, you can imagine those little slips of paper and how those slips of paper might have gone into Murray's giant computer, which was effectively just a whole bunch of cubby holes that were alphabetized. Definition number 10, my best girl, which is obsolete, right? So if it tells you a word is obsolete, it'll show you here, and then it says, well, around 1904, that definition was in usage. Continuing, here's the 11th definition of best as a noun, 12th, and then letter C, now we're in the adverb. So it's now a superlative of well, so the very most well. Okay, and again, here are all of our usages across time. The thing to notice here, I think, is that what we think of as the most simple words, the words that have the most utility and the highest frequency, are often the most complicated words syntactically because we put them to so many different kinds of use. So what we're seeing here as we scroll through is that best has a function as an adjective, as an adverb, as a noun, and then we saw that noun 2 is as a name. Look how long I've been scrolling, and we're continuing to find shades of careful explanation of the usage of this one word. And so this is the one of the huge advantages of the Oxford English Dictionary is it gives you when a word comes into existence in a particular usage and when it goes out again. So in terms of doing research for how English works, it's fantastic. It's incredibly useful in your close reading and take a look at a particular definition of a word. Right, so I think I've made my point that best just goes on and on, right? So again, looking at this word, you can see how our simple high-frequency words tend to have the most complicated OED entries because of the fact that they're used in so many different ways. If we look at a low-frequency word, and let's just dig around on the side here. So let's take the word meander. And notice here, it's an intransitive verb. You can't meander something or someone, right? It does not take a direct object. Next definition in intransitive use, in extended use. So I hope that this gives you a sense of what the OED can do. I just want to close by giving you one example from the OED that shows a new word recently added to the language, and to think a little bit about how we're using that word in our own lives versus the way the OED is using it, and to try to think about how that might be different, right? And I'm hoping that will generate some discussion in our class, because language is a moving, growing thing, and this Oxford English Dictionary is our best tool for charting how that works. Let's just take a look at the definitions for LOL. I think it's interesting that this records LOL as a verb happening in 1997. So first of all, I'm interested in the fact that it's capitalized, because I don't think that you probably capitalize it. It does give you forms capital LOL and lowercase LOL, and it gives us an etymology that says originally and chiefly in the language of electronic communications, ha ha, used to draw attention to a joke or humorous statement or to express amusement. And 1989 is when it's first observed. All right. So obviously you wouldn't write LOL in a final paper, and the way it's used here as initially haha, I don't think people quite use it that way anymore, and that might be something worth talking about in a discussion. So hopefully this video has given you a chance to just sort of think through what the OED can do for you. So thanks so much. Bye-bye.